All right, welcome back to another episode of the Demand Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan, the co-founder of Omni Lab, and today I'm joined by Chantelle. She and I actually got acquainted on LinkedIn. She's done this, that, and the other thing with regards to marketing. Seems to be all over the place, now doing her own thing as a marketer and independently consulting with a lot of different cool companies. So we're going to be talking about some really cool topics. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to finally join you.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's one of those things like with LinkedIn, I feel like where I keep seeing someone's name and I just have to reach out and say, hey, let's get on and let's have a chat. So, well, the one thing, so you and I chatted about this before, and I think it's just a perfect place to start. And then you and I can kind of break things down a little bit, but I think there's a lot of issues that we all agree that B2B companies are making. And I think that's just the topic always of any LinkedIn post. Hey, here's what you're doing wrong. Here's what you should be doing. There's certainly some that are more prominent than others, right? That we hear a lot about on, in the social sphere. But for you, I guess, what are some of the biggest issues that you see B2B SaaS companies making with respects to marketing? And then, what should we be doing to fix some of those things? Do you have a short list of things that come to mind that you see a lot with some of your clients?
I think a lot of B2B companies struggle with how to allocate resources to get the most out of them. Efficiency is always a big deal. I find that that's especially true when it comes to data management. Like the marketing teams always seem like we need more data. We know that we have to prove our value. We know that we have to align with sales and with other teams in the company, but we need the right analytics to be able to speak to that, to be able to decide how to prioritize, and really just communicating what marketing is doing and why we do the things that we do.
So when you say allocate resources, you mean allocating budget and dollars to, say, marketing teams versus sales teams and how that budget gets allocated in a SaaS company?
Right. Because even you and I were speaking, before we started the interview, and there's so many channels now. There's so many different places for marketers to focus and spend money. And you have to make the right decisions at the end of the day about what makes sense for your team and your brand. You can't do everything. You can't be everywhere. So how do you make those decisions, and how do you make sure that you're able to measure whether or not you're making the right decisions?
Well, let's say just for fun, like, and as an example, if I'm an early stage SaaS company, and let's say, I don't know, I just raised my seed round, or maybe I'm Series A, and I'm just getting my marketing org together. I've maybe spent some money, but I'm still very early on. How does one even determine which channels to start with? I mean, what would you think about in saying, these are the channels you should maybe think about? And, let's not add too much to the table in order to complicate things too much. How would you think about that in that situation?
Yeah, a lot of companies in that stage don't really have a mature marketing team yet. I find that often the founders are the ones who are shouldering a lot of the strategic decisions when it comes to sales and marketing. When they get that first marketing hire, that person, it's like, just a flood. Like
Yep.
everything is priority. You're trying to build the plane as you fly it. So there's so many challenges. I've been in that position before where I'm, head of marketing for a very small company. And it's like, where do you focus? For me, when I was making that decision, it was really looking at the goals that, we had, looking at the KPIs, looking at the budget. What did I have to work with? What team resources did I have? And deciding, what can I do with the strengths that we have here? At the time, for us, it was focusing on organic growth. So really focusing on driving that content engine, leveraging partnerships to create really compelling events, webinars, etc. And then focusing on like social growth and building community and leveraging that for creating evangelism externally. Driving up brand awareness. So that was where we had focused. I've worked with other companies that also focus on paid spaces, because those are the fastest to scale up. You'll see the fastest uptick in whatever you're looking for if you pay for it,
Mm.
obviously. And I mean, that's a variety of things. In the B2B space, it's usually a combination of digital advertising, but then also buying leads, buying lists, and then trying to nurture those and warm those up,
Mm.
which is not always the best path, in my opinion.
Mm.
We might want to add that to the list of mistakes that a lot of B2B orgs make. I
Yep.
think buying list is just not always a great path to go down, even if you're desperate to get the CRM full of leads that you can start working.
Hmm. Well, to go back to it, I think you said something interesting there, and I think it is difficult because we'll work with a lot of teams that are around that size, some bigger. And I think the challenge is always like, where do we invest? And should we be doing SEO? Literally just got off a call today with the CEO, and he's like, should we be investing more in SEO or paid? What should we do? Which one should we focus on? We don't have budget to do both at the same time. And I think that it's interesting you said organic webinars, events, social media, because I usually don't see a lot of companies at that stage focusing a lot on that. And I think they should be. I think usually where they focus is predominantly you'll see them focusing a ton on outbound email, usually in the beginning. And that's what they'll use to capture as much of the demand out there that already exists. And then they'll use paid, either usually after outbound emails kind of been scaled up and they started to see decreasing returns from it, or they just want to, they need to get bigger. There's more goals to hit, other things like that. They're more successful. They've got more revenue. And then they'll add on paid. And then that's where it kind of gets a little bit strange because without events, webinars, things to talk about, creating good content, then what do we distribute out on paid, right? Then it becomes harder. Then there's just more a messaging kind of push and pushing people to feature pages and home pages and things like that. But I guess the question that I have is, did you guys have a good, I know you said KPIs was one of the things you guys thought about at this company, but was there a reason that you decided to start organic webinars, creating events and things like that over, other channels like cold email or paid? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, I was really fortunate because I had a lot of flexibility, a lot of freedom. The CEO I reported directly into him. He gave me a lot of space.
Hmm.
And my area of expertise was really PR, SEO,
Hmm.
and social media. Those were really, when I was first starting out, the areas where I was strongest in.
Hmm.
And back then, it was just a very different landscape. You could get a lot more bang for your buck just through organic reach.
Hmm.
Um, and now we've seen algorithm updates, we're seeing privacy updates, we're seeing a ton more competition, just, wildly oversaturated space
Hmm.
online. Facebook and Google Ads not as reliable anymore. So
Hmm.
it's just a lot more complicated. And I think a lot of businesses for the past few years have been relying so heavily on paid acquisition, digital advertising, because it was a little bit easier.
Hmm.
And now we're seeing a shift back to, okay, we do need to balance our paid spend
Hmm.
with our organic growth, because
Exactly.
if you allow yourself to become too reliant in one area, they could, the rug gets pulled out from you when something crazy happens, when there's any sort of algorithmic change or,
Hmm.
um, a privacy change or anything.
Yep. Love it. Love it. So you said, so I think the big things are one of the biggest challenges is definitely allocating resources and not just resources internally, it sounds like, but you're really saying allocate resources to given channels. Like which channels should I focus on? And I think that's definitely a challenge. But ideally what you're saying is that you pick a channel that you can focus on in the beginning and then you slowly add on to it, but you don't try to do everything all at once. So you ultimately pick something that you think is going to best fit for your business, and then from there you can layer on additional channels and move slowly. And then the other thing you said was buying lists, which maybe we could dig into that for just a second or two. I think most people would probably agree with you these days with buying lists. I don't know too many people doing that anymore, but there probably are some people that are still thinking about it. But buying lists, like, why is that a bad idea? Like buying lists of what? Prospects, contacts, accounts, and things like that, and then using those to market from like an email perspective or paid media, or what do you mean by buying lists?
Yeah, it's definitely just buying contact information,
Hmm.
and you hope that it's targeted. I
Yep.
mean, usually in the past, when I've worked with companies that were like, we have to buy a list, we need something for our business development team or our sales development team to go after, they requested, I want 12,000 names who fit this, who have this title, fit this target demographic. We think that this is our ICP. So that's, the contact information that we want. And sometimes it's up to date. Sometimes it's not. Usually you have a very low rate of success there, which is, I think, really, it really negatively impacts both your brand and then your internal team as well. We see a lot of burnout and stress among those SDR and BDR teams because, that tactic is just so, it's the spray and pray old method where it's just like, okay, even if we get one conversion, it'll pay off for us. And I think people are really hopeful about that. You mentioned it, like a lot of earlier companies when they're very young are just like, we need someone to talk to. If we can get in front of them, we can convince them that there's value here. And that's definitely necessary in the beginning, but you've also got to be setting up that inbound engine because long term, even short term, the returns there are just so much higher, so much less effort that's required to be exerted than constantly every day having to hunt someone down, and then, try to get them to even pick up the phone or answer your emails.
I think what I'd add to that, I agree with you generally with everything you just said. I think what I'd add to that is that the game, the table stakes have been upgraded, right? Like what you have to do to be successful using outbound email has gotten a lot harder. It's not as easy as, to your point, buying a list, maybe getting it some way targeted, and then getting a generic message and pushing that out across a sequence with 6 to 12 steps or whatever it may be. Like that's not working anymore. And I think when people say things are dead, right? I don't know if you saw a post, but I posted about this and it's driving me nuts that like last month or something, everyone was calling every channel dead. I'm like, well, what do we do? Should we just not do anything? I mean, SEO's dead, paid ads are dead. So I guess I'll just give up. But no, I mean, it's one of those things where now I think what needs to be done for especially outbound email, just talking about this as it relates to buying lists, is that it requires an immense more amount of a personalization and immense more amount of focus on targeting the right accounts from the beginning. Because getting a list, I mean, buying lists, I think we're all on the same page, shouldn't be buying lists, but leveraging a Zoom or Apollo, whoever you use, Seamless, etc., that hopefully has relatively up-to-date data, and making sure you do a really good job on targeting the front end of that, focusing on less contacts, not trying to go after every single person in there, but less people with a more focused message, with hopefully some folks that maybe have some intent. I have seen those leading to very good results. We're talking 15, 20, 25% on reply rates off of those sequences. Now, we don't run those ourselves. This is just kind of anecdotally through our clients and whatnot. But I think that that's an important piece of this, is like these channels, like it's all about how you use them. A channel isn't necessarily bad itself. It's just, what were you doing on that channel? And I find that very interesting as a follow-up question, like, well, how did you run the channel, right?
Now you're starting to touch on ABM and really being very focused and strategic with where you spend your time and making those outbound efforts. Because generally you're going to see it require a number of touch points. At the company I was referencing before, we did have, I worked with the sales team to develop outbound campaigns, and we were seeing like an average of 7 touch points required for us to even get someone to agree to do a demo and sit in with us, which is not uncommon. I think the more, like you were saying, personalized and very targeted that you can be, the higher the likelihood that you're gonna be successful. But that requires so much work on the front end that, you've really got to make sure that the accounts that you're going after are gonna be high ROI and worthwhile.
Let's dig on that one, because ABM is such a funny thing to me. I mean, ABM is nothing but good marketing, in my opinion. But and frankly, sales has been doing ABM since the turn of time. But I'm glad marketing's now getting in on the show and saying, hey, we want to join in on this. We want to target the same accounts that sales is targeting, and we want to have messaging that really relates to those people. Okay, great.
We've just come up with a cool name for it now that we like to use.
Exactly. It made it very complicated. So, but I mean, in your opinion, I mean, maybe there's probably some lessons out of here, and just terms about a theme of like biggest issues with, B2B SaaS companies around ABM. But I think you maybe mentioned one, targeting, I think is one, certainly. But anything that kind of comes to mind that you've seen with the company you worked for, or any clients that you've had with regards to problems that they are making with regards to running ABM campaigns and the way they're thinking about it?
I think that ABM campaigns really have to see the successful alignment of sales and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You've really just got to be so lockstep with each other. And for a lot of organizations, that's a challenge because, two different focuses, seemingly two different goals that are in front of them. I would say that the most successful ABM campaigns that I've participated in have been where I've worked really closely and communicated really closely with the sales team,
Mm-hmm.
shared KPIs, shared dashboards, a lot of communication, really clear cut processes on how we were managing that, especially in the CRM, to go back to the data management piece of things.
Mm-hmm.
When sales is updating things and marketing can hop in there and run reports and provide that sort of feedback on how are things going.
Mm-hmm.
And then making sure marketing as well is keeping things clean, and really just managing those workflows. It makes everything work so much better.
I think what you said, the key part of that is shared KPIs. That's probably one of the number one things that I see that is an issue across a lot of those campaigns, is because marketing is being compensated or measured on a different metric than what sales is being measured on. And this is an interesting one. I think maybe we talked about this earlier, but if marketing is incentivized to drive more leads into the funnel and sales is incentivized to drive more pipeline into the funnel, then those are sometimes competing tasks, right? We do need leads for pipeline, right? It's very important. You can't have one without the other. However, when we start to optimize for the number of leads and we start getting a lead target over marketing's head, that's where it sometimes leads to problems. And then marketing says, well, hey, I got to meet my number. I've got pressure, right? I don't want to miss. So then that starts where the definition gets looser on a lead, gets looser on the targeting criteria. And then that's how they ultimately say, hey, now we've kind of gotten to that number. So how do you kind of, do you agree with that? Do you think that that's difficult with some of the clients that you talk with regards to making sure that KPI is the same? Is that a challenging conversation, you think?
Yes, agreeing on both sides and all sorts sides of the organization. What is a lead? What is an MQL? What is an SQL? What are the triggers that move people through the funnel?
Yep.
Always a really tough conversation. And you often hear from marketing, well, I don't have control over what happens when I pass over a batch of leads or MQLs to the sales team. So I don't want to be held accountable for the conversion
Mm-hmm.
after the fact. I brought these guys in. Now it's after the sales team to
Mm-hmm.
really do their part. So we want to be compensated based on us upholding our
What
end
you
of
have
things.
control over.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really creates a deepened divide between sales and marketing that has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the importance of processes and CRM management and transparency on both sides really becomes important, because if the marketing team knows and can trust that the sales team is going to do XYZ,
Mm-hmm.
like marking when, the source of something is marketing,
Mm-hmm.
or making sure that they are following up on all leads, even if they feel like, this one isn't as valuable or won't get me as high of a
Right.
commission. That builds trust, and it really creates just more of a seamless marketing engine throughout the entire org.
And I think with the definitions too, to your point, when the definitions are the same and everyone agrees that like sales, this is a good lead for me, and marketing says, okay, this is a good lead, and everyone's on the same page, then that trust is going to increase just organically. Because
Mm,
if I stop giving you leads that have no intent, that, just walked by at an event and I scanned their badge and I said, hey, follow up with these people, right? Then I'm going to start saying, okay, now I'm going to just pass the people that said, hey, this person actually wants to talk to you. Like they
mm,
want to talk to you. So go talk to them. And that's the reason we're passing this lead to you. And then sales takes on that lead. And then certainly conversion rates are going to be a lot higher on that. And then they're going to have the ability to say, okay, great. Like this is awesome. Marketing's great. I love what they're giving me, versus lots of other busy work. Cause I was actually one of these people that was in the role of following up on a lot of things that just didn't have intent, people that didn't want to talk to me, and it was a waste of time. So ultimately what I thought is like, I don't know what marketing's doing. I don't know. I think they do designs and colors, and they always give me these leads from events and stuff like that to follow up on, but none of it ever goes anywhere. Whereas you
Hmm.
can change that relationship, to your point, by aligning the definitions and making sure both of them, both sales and marketing, is on the same page, so that when you do pass that lead, it's like, well, hey, we already agreed. We already have the plan. Here were the definitions. Here's when we were going to pass the lead to you. And everyone can, there's no complaining. It's just about saying, hey, this is what we're doing.
Exactly.
So,
It's all about that communication and transparency. Early in my career, I almost felt like scared to be transparent with sales because I was so worried about like they're going to pick this apart or they're going to, have feedback that's going to make my job like a million times more challenging.
mm-hmm.
Um, and losing that mindset really just changed so much for me in my
Oh,
career.
exactly. Totally agree. Totally agree. All right. One more in terms of other issues that you see with B2B SaaS companies. Any others come to mind? I've got one kind of in the back of my head that I don't think we've really circled around, but anything that comes to your mind?
I mean, I hate to beat the same drum as everybody else. Everybody says B2B is boring. That,
Yep.
like,
Heard that.
I swear.
And then no one does anything about it. We all love to say B2B is boring, and all right, let's keep doing the same thing. So what? Yeah.
But I'm going to give some credit to some B2B orgs. I'm seeing a lot more innovation,
Mm.
especially from some of the big guys, HubSpot, Salesforce.
Mm-hmm.
There are companies that are changing the game a little bit. Sendoso, I got included in some ABM campaign that they were running, and I really enjoyed
Mm.
like going through that process and that experience. It was really
Well, let me ask you. Let
kind
me
of
ask you a
cool.
follow-up question too. Like, what does boring mean? Does boring just mean it's not entertaining and funny, or does boring mean it's not personalized and unique to you, or what does boring mean in your mind?
I feel like it just reminds us too much of work.
Yeah.
Like when you're seeing consumer facing campaigns, usually they're, really tapping into that emotional connection. You
Mm.
see things that resonate with your entire lifestyle.
Mm.
So there may be an element of work, but they're, touching on family. They have a sense of humor. A
Mm.
lot of B2B companies they want to err on the side of caution,
Mm.
much more conservative tone, trying to be authoritative. Thought leadership is like a big one. And sometimes it's like people just want to laugh. They just want to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they just want to laugh or feel something warm and fuzzy inside.
I totally agree, and I think you're right. Yeah, Gong, I think has always done a pretty good job with that. There's another company that's coming
Yes.
to mind. HubSpot, Gong, Dooley. I like Dooley's content
Mm,
actually a lot. It's
yes.
very BuzzFeedy in a way, but I know that I'm forgetting her name. Who's the head of content over there? I always forget her name.
Camille?
Camille, yeah. So she had,
Camille Trent, yeah.
I think it's them. Correct me if I'm mixing this up, but they had something they've been doing with like Star Wars related stuff, and they've been putting heads on various characters in it. And I honestly, minus like telling you that, I'm not sure I've really understood. They've just been using Star Wars themed stuff, but the point is like already I'm talking about it. I related to Julie, so like you're
Right.
laughing, I'm smiling. Like Julie kind of has that, they seem more fun. They seem like they're
Yeah.
having a good time over there. And I think honestly, there's a benefit not only from that from a buyer's perspective in attracting clients, but you also think about it from a recruiting perspective too, and say, all right, hey, like not only our advertisements or organic content or whatever it is that we're putting out there is attracting hopefully buyers that are like super excited, and we're telling the story in a different way with a little bit of fun around it. We're also attracting people that want to work with us because, everyone wants to work with a fun company, and something's lively and doing things a little bit different. So I think that it kind of goes on both edges. So,
Yeah, and that's a huge one right now, the internal marketing piece of things. My friend Carrie Ann on LinkedIn as well, she hosts the internal marketing podcast. And I think that bridge between marketing and like culture or the talent team has gotten a lot more solid lately with the great resignation, a lot of turnover for a lot of companies, a lot more challenges in attracting uh, talent and then
mm-hmm,
keeping them. Marketing plays a role in that because we have the ability to
mm-hmm,
really excite people to present the first face externally of a
mm-hmm.
company. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
100%. Well, I want to end on one thing because I don't think we can leave this episode without at least mentioning it. So I'll kind of kick it off, and then maybe you can chime in with your thoughts around it. But I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we see with a lot of SaaS companies is the obsession over attribution, and everything has to be attributed down to the creative, the campaign level, the channel, et cetera, et cetera. And the issue with this, a lot of times, especially depending on the types of campaigns that you're running, and we run a combination of some of it's lead gen, but a lot of it's also brand awareness and just really increasing consumption of the content in social channels, for example, like LinkedIn and Facebook. And when you start running those types of strategies, a lot of times you don't necessarily always see all the attributable conversions coming out of those two channels, because that's not the goal. And either way, the intent of those channels is also different from a channel like search. So a lot of times we'll actually see increases in organic, direct, and then also branded keyword search in terms of conversions. But we get into the battle a lot of trying to say, well, where did this come from? And I want to know that if I put a nickel into LinkedIn that I get 3 out. And we get in these battles when we know that attribution is never going to be perfect. There's ad blockers, cookie problems, there's iOS 14, all these things that are changing that are making it harder and harder for us to actually understand what's working and what's not. So while it's still important to track what we can, there needs to be kind of a evolving approach of saying, hey, maybe we really just need to focus on looking at the aggregate kind of movement from a marketing perspective and not get too hung up on a given channel, because the issue that happens is that people will start turning off channels too early, and they'll say that this is not working. This is not a good converting channel for us, because everyone's mind is coming from the D2C space thinking I've got to convert someone out of every single channel I run. And they're thinking about it a little more linearly, where it's, as you know, we just talked about this earlier, the B2B buying journey is definitely not linear. You go through multiple different touch points. I think you said 7. Sometimes I've heard even more than that in some cases. So it takes months of time potentially to work up a great brand and an audience around that. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that in the attribution world, because I think we all struggle with it. And it's a tough conversation, especially as marketers now are moving towards pipeline and revenue numbers they've got to be accountable to. That brings in the nature of, all right, well, where are we actually attributing the pipeline of revenue to? What channels? And any thoughts you have on that in terms of some of your clients?
So many.
Good.
I I work with B2B companies, SaaS companies, but I also work with a lot of e-commerce brands, and their
Different beast.
data is so crazy. It's like daily, just like you have to be on top of everything, every sale, every conversion. So it's made me much more aware and much more close to the data than I ever have been previously. Attribution is always a conversation that comes up, especially when I am helping to a lot of times with clients, I am working with them to take every channel, working with every marketing channel manager and saying, okay, how can we help you to see how your efforts are actually impacting this ultimate KPI of driving revenue? And you're right, it's super challenging. A lot of times I have to have these conversations where I have to tell people, data isn't perfect. We don't have perfect access yet. All these platforms make a lot of promises. They all sound great. There just is not a perfect platform. We don't have the ability to capture every single thing that you want to know. So a lot of times you do have to keep that in mind, that there's going to be, a level of accuracy, but it's never going to be 100%. So going into that with that mindset can really help. I think that becoming familiar with the different attribution models can often help, especially depending on which channels are valuable for you. So if you're looking at, email or social, those email's not going to drive the needle that much for top of funnel. So a lot of times you have to look at the overall conversion pathways and spot out where it's appearing. A lot of times I like to go into, in particular, Google Analytics, because it's, the most ubiquitous platform. But go into there and look at the different conversion pathways and see what patterns are forming, and decide, is this, reflective of where I'm spending my efforts, where the budget is being allocated? Should this change any? Should certain channels be appearing more where I'm spending a lot of money or spending a lot of time and they're just not featuring as prominently? And sometimes you have to dig a little bit as well. You have to look at the actual conversions and say, read between the lines. So, create stories to go beyond the data and to tell the actual story of what actually is happening. Having conversations with your customers helps out a lot as well, because they can fill in the gaps for you. Things that you wouldn't know, like, oh, I read this article about you, and then I went and did a Google search, and that's how I ended up finding out about you. But you would have missed that initial touch point because, they didn't click on a link or whatever. I also really always recommend having a really sophisticated process around UTMs, because that can really help with providing a lot of transparency as well.
100%. Yeah, I think it is difficult. And I'll just end by saying that I think the way that, certainly one way to think about it is to say, all right, we're going to measure what we can by each channel and what's attributable.
Yep.
We're going to use, at minimum, and most CRMs can do first and last touch. So try to at least capture some of the journey just natively within either Salesforce or HubSpot, and try to make sure you can capture both sides of it. The third thing is, especially in ungated strategies, or just when you're trying to just run content and you want more consumption on it, you've also got to change your goals around that. That campaign's not going to be necessarily a conversion campaign. You still may get conversions out of the channel off of it. But the way to look at that is to say, all right, put an open text form on your website, which is just super old school. I don't know why it's become now trendy to do again, but people have been doing that for many years. But anyway, it's still a good idea to have, just ask people how they heard about you, and whether it's on your website or you ask them over the phone, you record it on a recording piece of software like Gong or Course or whatever you use. Ask them that, and then try to normalize that data a bit to try to understand where people are coming from and what they're saying. And that'll provide you some other guides. But all of these are guides. They're not black and white. It isn't just because someone clicked your search ad, they came from search, right? I mean, lots of other actions happen before search. Lots of other actions happen before LinkedIn or Facebook, et cetera. So we just need to know that, like, ultimately we measure what we can, and then at the end of the day, we look back at the aggregate and say, all right, are we driving more inbound demo requests, if that's the goal, more inbound pipeline, and more inbound revenue? And if that's the case, and we're doing well on those things, we know our audience is on those channels, let's keep spending. Let's keep spending more money. Let's have different messages. Let's deploy out more content, et cetera. And that's how you end up scaling up those channels, and do that over time. And hopefully you should see an increase and a steady increase in pipeline and revenue. And I think at least that's the way that we think about it here, at Omni and what we do. But it is difficult. And I think that alignment from the beginning, what you just said, was probably the most important thing. Got to get aligned on that from the beginning, because otherwise this becomes a nightmare 3-6 months down the line with, like, Chantelle, where are the leads? Where's it going? And they're looking at one channel. You're like, wait a minute, I'm looking at another dashboard and you're doing fine. Pipeline's up like 20%. What's the issue? So it's those little things that are important. But well, anyway, thank you so much for joining. If people want to follow you, I assume you mentioned some channels earlier like LinkedIn and Twitter. Where's the best place to kind of get in touch with you?
Yeah, those two are probably the biggest ones, or just my website, chantellemarcelle.com. That's, I link out to everything there. So
love it.
Just trying to do it all.
Love it, as usual. All right, well, cool. Well, thanks, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.